pandemic. But today I have Ms. Opsinky, STL advocate, talking about advocacy. So do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Larry Opsinky. I am with stladvocate.com, and I've been doing professional disability advocacy for about 3 years, but been involved with the disability community for 20 years.
Wow, okay. So my first question is, I know you are a disability advocate. In your own words, can you define what that means for people who might not be familiar with that term?
So I tell people disability and advocacy, that specifically the word advocacy sort of has two meanings. There's big A advocacy, which is what you do for yourself. And it could be advocating for anything that you want, whether it's going to the grocery store and saying, no, I don't want that piece of bologna. I want that other piece of bologna. That's advocating. And it's very personal. Big A advocacy is all about advocating for you yourself within to do things. And then there's little a advocacy, which I say is advocacy for everyone. So that would be advocacy maybe in your community to, we've seen it a lot in the past few weeks here, advocating for equal rights for all people, and the changing in the way people interact with the police, and Black Lives Matter, and all of those are what I would call little a advocacies, because it's, yes, it might affect you personally, but it is for the whole community. And then when you tag that with disability, for me specifically, it really has to do with anybody who is differently abled, doesn't have what some people refer to as normal. And
Yeah.
I always say normal is, there's no such thing as normal. Normal is a setting on a dryer. That's really all a normal is. But disability advocacy, and what I do, is both big A and little a, around people who have different needs to exist and be productive members of the society and have a full and meaningful life.
Yeah, and normal is overrated. I want the YouTuber that actually has a t-shirt that says normal is overrated.
I agree. It's definitely, I'm the first one to correct it, and my family all sort of rolls their eyes when someone in our presence will say, well, is that, it's not normal, and they know what I'm going to say. They know I'm going to use that whole dryer thing, which that's the only place where the word normal has meaning, is normal dry as opposed to extra dry or not as dry.
Yeah. I do that too. I tell people what's normal for you and it's normal for everyone else.
That's right.
Can you explain the money you took to become a disability advocate?
Yeah, my journey's been very unique. I will say, so I am now 50 something years old. When I grew up, I didn't know anything about disability. I didn't know really any disabled people in my community. Well, I take that back. I knew one man who used a wheelchair, who I was actually really close with, and sort of formed my views of disability early on, which is, disability is just a word. It doesn't mean you can't do anything. It's just means that it's a descriptor. It's an adjective. It's not a verb meaning. So when I grew up and got married, and my wife and I had our first child, Lily. We have 2 children now, Lily and Sam. Lily is now 20 and Sam's 16, and Lily has Rett syndrome, which we didn't find out till she was about almost 2 years old. And it was a genetic diagnosis and things like that. And at that point, that was when I first sort of, even envision the world of disability. I understood that after taking a class that I felt was important called Partners in Policymaking, and making friends with people that have disabilities was the first time I'd ever interacted with anyone who has a disability, that I realized that there is a whole nother world, and has been a whole nother world out there that people exist in, the world of disability, that I never knew existed. And from that point on, I guess it was the birth of my daughter and the fact that she has a disability, and me realizing I'm not a doctor. I can't, quote unquote, fix my kid, and that's what guys and dads do. We want to fix stuff. That's not a thing in the world of disability. You don't fix people with disabilities. What I did realize is that I can go out and try to make the world a better place, and try to create a quality of life for my daughter and other people with disabilities. And that's what sort of set me on my journey. And I started volunteering everywhere. I've been on state boards for Missouri Protection and Advocacy. I did federal testimony with the Department of Justice on shutting down habilitation centers. To this day, I'm on the Parkway, which is our local school district. I'm on the Parkway Board of Education Steering Committee for the Advisory Council. I'm on the Parents Advisory Council. Lots and lots of volunteer hours that I put into learn and to help and try to use skills that I have developed in my life to help further to make the world a better place for my daughter, like I said, and for all people with disabilities. Because, you know, you judge a society by how you treat people who maybe can't help themselves as much. And I believe that.
Yeah, I didn't even know the whole YouTube community with disability people. And then when I started it 3.5 years ago almost, I was like, wow, I'm meeting so many people with disability who are making videos about their daily life so people know what their life is like. I had no idea. I thought YouTube was with video made and hair tutorial. I literally had no idea there was a hidden community of disabled people advocating for their disability. But here I am, 250 people later. So, yeah, let's see. I know you're a company parent to your daughter Millie, who has Rett syndrome. How has that experience changed your view on advocacy or life in general?
Well, that was kind of, Lily's my inspiration. She, like I said, until we received a diagnosis and realized that Lily had a disability, and sort of what the world would be like for her. I didn't know anything about disability. I grew up in business and in industry. I owned a factory. I made shoes for 35 years. It just wasn't even in my world. It changed my life. It changed the way I approach literally everything I do. I call it my umbrella. Lily's my umbrella. So no matter what I'm doing or how I'm interacting, whether I'm out to dinner or at the grocery store or, you know, helping families or talking with a group of people, Lily's always up there over, you know, making sure that I know that the world is different and for her, and whatever I say or do, it affects that world.
I know Millie is an inspiration for me too. I think about her and then I think about my life. I'm like, what would Millie do in this situation? There are times where I can just be riding my bike and I might do something really funny and be like, man, Millie would really like that. Teddy and I, one of my best friends, Teddy, were out riding a bike, and I saw something, and we both went, oh, Millie would like that. Only we were videotaping, but we didn't have our phone out on us.
Well, here we're talking a lot about Lily. I should show here. I'll hold up a picture.
Oh, yeah.
That was from this weekend. Lily and I on Sunday got to go to the botanical garden. So that was just us taking a quick selfie out front of the botanical garden. We had a really lovely morning, just walking around and trying to be a little bit like COVID doesn't exist. So that's Lily.
Yeah. Okay, where am I? Oh, what is your business advice for young adults with disabilities when it comes to advocacy and adulthood?
Advocacy and adulthood, those are big ones. Those are big things. I mean, what I tell everyone about, no matter where they are in disability, whether it's a young person or a parent or an older adult, is you always have to be looking at your next transition. Everything you do each and every day has to be with one eye and with all intentions on how it's going to help you with whatever your next transition is. So, very young people in, elementary school and middle school and even high school a little bit, their next transitions are, what am I going to do the next year? Or what am I going to do when I go to the next school building or something like that? When you start to get into high school, you get into, I think, what you're referring to, which is young adults. What is it? What am I going to do after high school? What am I going to do? I like to say, when the school bus doesn't come anymore. And that's a figurative phrase. I know everybody doesn't ride a school bus, but how do you see filling your, and I tell people to start off with 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, the work week, if you will. Are you going to go to work? Are you going to have a job? Are you going to volunteer? Are you going to go to some sort of programming? Are you going to go to more school? How are you going to fill your week? What does your next transition look like? And that way, no matter every day that goes by, you're doing little things every single day that eventually will stack up. So you start off the first day, well, I'm going to make a couple phone calls about this program. And then the day after, you're like, okay, I'm going to make a couple more phone calls because I didn't talk to anybody. And then the next day, okay, well, I talked to those people. I'm going to go online and see if I can find people who've done that. And I want to find out what they think about it. And you build on it and you build on it till eventually, instead of just having this one little step towards this big transition, you've gone like this far. So I tell people every day work towards your next transition. So transition to adulthood, away from the school system, that's a big one. There's no question about it. There's a lot of change that goes on with that. Anna, you're in the middle of it. So,
I'm totally in the middle of it right now.
Well, you're at the beginning of it. You're not even at the middle of it yet. You're just at the beginning of it.
Right.
But there's even steps beyond that. So let's say you've gotten through that level. The next transition might be, where are you going to live, in the future? Maybe you live at home and maybe you want to get an apartment. And then beyond that is, what are you going to do when the supports that you have, that you use now, which a lot of times young people use their family as supports, you're going to get to a point where you're like, I don't know if I want my family, or your family's going to be like, I don't think I can do this anymore.
Right.
I'm getting old, or I got other obligations. You don't know. So, how is that transition going to look away from your traditional care? And then I actually have clients and stuff that are even older than that, in their 30s and in their 40s and in their 50s. And for them, it's a lot of even further planning. Okay, where do I want to spend my quote retirement? Okay, I'm not going to be working for that many more years. What do I want to do for the next stage? Where do I want to live? How am I going to get people to take care of me? All of those pieces are transitions. So I tell people, always be planning for your next transition.
Definitely. If you don't plan, then what are you going to do? But even I plan when I go out with people who are not my family, my friends, I plan every bit of detail to a point where it sounds like I'm insane, but I'm advocating for what I need. I need this, I need, I need this, I need you here. You know, so it's
Right.
very important to be organized. That's what I done. That's what disability has taught me to be more organized. I can't imagine what life would be like if I wasn't organized.
Right. And I think another big important thing is when I tell people that about transition and planning, nobody has a crystal ball. Nobody has the perfect answer for everything. And
Yeah,
and sometimes the hardest thing that I work with families on is the change part of it. It's like, wait a second, we were going here and we had done everything and it set all up and we were planning on being right up here. It's, by this date, we were going to be right here. And now all of a sudden, we're going in this direction. We can't get over here from here. Well, what are we going to do here? And I try to explain to people, it's great to plan. Yes, you have to have plans and you have to be working towards something, but be okay with keeping moving in the different. There's nothing wrong. There's no
right,
wrong decision. This is life. You go down one path, you're like, I don't know if that was so good. Let's go to this path. And then you keep going forward as long as you keep moving forward.
right.
That's the important part.
That is the important thing. What is your biggest piece of advice for new Saturday parents?
So it's interesting you asked that question. I saw that in your notes. So I used to, and I just got a call today on it. I put on a year-long seminar with two other clinicians called the Hope Seminar. That was exactly that. And it was an acronym honoring, let's see, how do we remember what it stands for? Honoring people everywhere, honoring. It basically, the function of the seminar that we put on was empowering, honoring parent involvement, honoring something parent involvement. Yeah, I should remember what that is. I'll also dig that out. But it was to take a family that just got a diagnosis for their child that they have a disability. And sometimes they're babies, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're kids, in their early teens that maybe got in an accident and have a traumatic brain injury or something. There's a lot of, at whatever stage they're at, and walk them through the systems. And we explain, we broke it down into 3 or 4 parts. The first was sort of what most people are concerned about, which is insurance. How are they going to get the care? How are they going to pay for all of the care that they have Googled or their professionals have told them or their friends have told them they need to get to help their child? And we walk through the insurance structure with them and what it looks like to have private insurance and whether it's federal and whether it's state. And then we talked about the public insurance and Medicaid and things like that. Then we talked about advocacy, in all honesty. Advocacy, saying that it's okay to ask too many questions because there's no such thing as too many questions. And if you have a professional, let's say you go to a doctor, you've got your 5-year-old, let's say, we'll use an example. You have your 5-year-old. Your 5-year-old's been diagnosed with autism, let's say, because it's very predominant. You got this diagnosis of autism and you go into this therapist office that everybody says, oh, you got to use this therapist. And you go to the therapist's office and the therapist, does some work. And then you go in to ask some questions and the therapist is like, oh, no, we don't answer any of those questions. Sorry, we're done. We don't have anything to do. And that doesn't sit well with you. Go find a new therapist. Just because everybody says it works for you, you have to speak up and advocate for yourself. You will be your child's biggest expert. No matter how many degrees are on the wall behind the doctor you're meeting with or the professional you're working with, you will still know your child the best. And you have to be comfortable in advocating and speaking up for your child when it comes to medical professionals, when it comes to school, when it comes to government resources that you might need or be asking for, because your child's not able to do that for themselves at this point. So, insurance, we do advocacy, we do a big piece on nutrition and health, and understanding how important hydration is, how important, you know, balanced diets are, how important consistency in feeding is. A lot of times parents will, you know, they have a kid with special needs and they'll be like, well, all they want is goldfish and hot dogs, and they just throw a fit, so we just give them goldfish and hot dogs all the time. Okay, that's okay within reason, but there's structures that you need to do, because if you can't keep the body healthy, it's hard to work on all the other stuff that's going on in the body. So
Right.
we did a big piece on that. And then I guess the other two pieces, we talk about funding, because having a child with a disability can be extremely expensive. And, you know, it can be, whether it's, you know, beyond the medical care, it can be equipment, it could be support. People need personal care attendant, people need help, you know, with a kid. And sometimes it means, instead of having two parents that work, only one parent can work. And maybe that one parent working isn't making enough money to pay for the other stuff. So where they can go for help and what that looks like, and public programs and private programs and things like that. So we talk in general about those types of things. And then the last thing is the healthcare world. We talk about, you know, resources in our area in St. Louis, because we do the program here in St. Louis, and we talk about Children's Hospital, and we talk about Cardinal Glennon, and we talk about the Mercy system, we talk about the FHQMs, the federal, or the FQHMs, the Federally Qualified Health Network, that accepts all Medicaid, and where to reach out for those big resources, big medical resources, and then also the little ones too. Like, what do you do in the summer? What are the good camps to go to for kids with disabilities? Or what do you do for recreation? Are there softball leagues? Are there swimming programs? Trying to give the family sort of a balance of, okay, they're in the world of disability, their kid's not going to be able to join the softball team all their other kids join too. Can he not play softball? No, of course we could play softball. Here's some ways you go about getting on that softball team, or here's another softball league that would love to have your kid. And we try to give them a sense of control and understanding, and for them to know they're not in it alone. And that's usually the biggest function of that seminar. And what I would tell anybody, you're not alone. You might feel like it, but you are absolutely not alone.
Right. There's a million people going through everything that everyone else is going through. It's not only disability.
Yeah.
I learned that in high school. I definitely learned that when I was in high school. Okay. What do you think the biggest misunderstanding people have about accessing or using programs that help with disabled?
So what type of programs are you thinking about? Because that's a pretty big question. So
Dad wrote it.
Dad wrote it. All right, I know what programs he's asking about that. I would say the biggest misunderstanding that people have is thinking that the government programs, the bureaucracy,
Yeah.
that has funding and things for these programs, that the people that are working in those programs, that they don't care, and all they care about is saving money and not spending money. I think that's a misunderstanding. I'm not saying it doesn't exist in sometimes, but I think it's a misunderstanding. I think people get frustrated and they throw their arms up and they're like, forget it. They don't care. They don't want to do it. Where in the end, it's not that. It's paperwork, it's politics, it's a lot. You have to go through a lot of hoops, different steps to get to the programs. And once you're in the programs, to keep the programs, that people kind of throw it all back on the staff who are running the programs and thinking it's them, it's their fault. And that's not the case. The case, I think the case is more about the misunderstanding that people have about programs, and those programs are financial benefit programs, government financial benefit programs. Those programs limiting factor is on the culture and the politics of the state and the United States, of the state of Missouri in the United States, than it is on the people who are actually in there doing the work the best they can with what they've been given. Does that help?
Yeah, I think in the, who knows? Dad wrote the one too.
Yeah, kind of look like it.
Huh?
Kind of look like it.
Yeah. I was, when you read this over, he was, yeah, and then he was, what if we asked him? And I'm like, okay, fine. You write me, and I okay. What are the terms you are seeing in the program helping the disabled? Is it living easier to get help or difficult?
So, and I understood it, and you wrote it out for me, but I'll say it again so that your listeners, it says, what are the trends you are seeing in programs helping the disabled? Is it getting easier to get help or more difficult? I would say the biggest trend in the past 10 years has been more inclusion. And that's a super positive trend. More self-directed supports, more letting the individual who has a disability decide how the money is going to get spent to help them be productive in life. Up until a few years ago, it was very what's called provider driven, where the money was given to, let's say, a company that says that they help people with disabilities, and the person with disability would go to the company and sort of do whatever they said they had to do because they're the ones who had the money. And there's been a very strong trend to what's called, it's referred to as an acronym, MFP, which is money follows the person, where instead of taking the money in all of these big programs and giving them to these big companies to do the work, you give the money to the individual. And you say, who do you want to do the work? Where do you want to spend this money on? And that's been a really, really positive trend. And it's been driven by advocates all over the country and the world that have acknowledged that there's a lot of waste in that structure of the system. There's a lot of people that could benefit from the money giving directly to them and them to go out. I'll give you a practical example. So let's say you grow up in St. Louis, Missouri, and you decide for your job that you want to work at the local grocery store chain. Schnucks is the name of the chain. And you go to Schnucks and you say, okay, I want to work for you, but I need some supports. I need, I'm going to need someone to sort of help me, get in from the car, and I'm going to need someone to help me make sure that doors are opened or closed or something like that. There's some supports you need to be able to work at Schnucks. The way it used to work was Schnucks would be like, sorry, I got nothing, I can't help you. The way it works now is there are companies like Easter Seals Midwest and Goodwill Industries that get money. They're providers and they get money. And you go to them and you say, hey, I want to work at Schnucks. And they're like, you know what? People train and we can go in there for 90 days. And we can help work with you and with Schnucks for 90 days and get it all set up. And then they're done. But in the end, what would be the best is if instead of those companies having that pot of money to go into Schnucks and help you, if they gave that money to you and you said, okay, this is the amount of money, and you go to Schnucks, you say, you know what, I want a job here. And these are the supports I need, and I have this funding that I am willing to give to you in exchange for you helping me work there and you help training your other natural support staff to help me work there. And you know what? That scenario, I think, is a much more productive scenario. So that was a long answer to the first part of the question. The second part of the question is said was it getting better or worse? And then is it easier or more difficult?
Yeah.
It's not easier, but I don't know if it's more difficult. I think it's just a different, I call it moving the cheese. And that's what's been happening a lot lately. And that goes back to politics, unfortunately, because the funding for most of this comes down from the federal government through the state government. And those are governed by different political entities, and they make policy, and policy affects how money gets spent. So depending on someone's view of the value of a person with a disability, either a political party or an administration or even a lobbying organization, that directly affects how the funding in the end gets to the actual person that needs it, right down in the front. They're back here and they're saying, oh, it would be great if we took all of this and we got it all the way down to this one person. But right now, all of this is being cut up into chunks, and we're giving it to all these other people. So all those other people don't want to lose it. So they are getting together and saying, hey, don't mess with this. Even though it would be better down here, don't mess with what you're giving to me. We'll try to get it down there better than we did before. So I think it's not more difficult. It's just a different kind, but it's not easier. It's just a different change of the way it's going. At least people are talking about being more inclusive.
Right,
At
and
least
that's really important because I interviewed another lady about 2 weeks ago. Her name was Tina, and she was talking about how important and student is. Because her daughter has minor muscular atrophy and
SMA,
has
yep.
a paralyzed vocal cord, and so she talks very quietly, and nobody in student and any student she witnessed there was more early education for the preschool and young people, so that when those young people become, old enough to advocate or old enough to know what's going on, they can educate the people around them.
Absolutely. I think that's, when I said it's more inclusive now, that's why. The Americans with Disabilities Act, the IDEA, which brings educational equality. There are more kids with disabilities being educated alongside their peers today than there was at any time in history. And what it has done is it's created an environment where young people and people starting to get older don't see someone using a wheelchair or talking funny and assume that they have no value. And sadly, that's the history of disability. When I was a kid, there were no kids with disabilities in school. Not because they didn't exist. They just didn't send them to school.
Yeah, because it wasn't innovative enough.
Yeah, well, they were told by doctors and school teachers and the government that, sorry, that those kids aren't going to have any value. We don't have a space for them in school. So this has been great. You have any other questions? Anything else you want me to answer?
Thank you so much for being on my channel, and I will make my comments open. So if you have any other questions, let me know. And if they're from Mr. Pesky, I can always text them to you, or if I can answer them, I will answer them. My comment section is always open, right? Yeah.
Well, very good. I'm happy to answer any questions. It's shameless plug, stladvocate.com. Anyone needs assistance, I am happy
I'll
to.
put it down in the description.
Oh, in the thing down. Yeah, that'd be great. And
Yeah.
I'm happy to do a 30-minute free consult for anyone. If I can answer all your questions in 30 minutes, that's great. And if not, I'm happy to help further.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on my channel. This was fun.
This was a lot of fun, Anna. Thank you very much. I like what you do. Good luck.
Bye.
Bye-bye.